Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
You know it's my birthday today, right? I said, my voice low, half sarcastic, half begging, standing in the doorway of the living room where my parents were glued to the TV, laughing at some rerun of a sitcom they'd both seen a dozen times. My mother didn't even glance up from her knitting, just smirked like I'd told her something stupid, like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't know I was in. My dad just chuckled and waved his hand like I was interrupting something more important. What again, he said, not even kidding. Didn't you just have one last year? I wish I could say I was surprised. I wish I could say this was the first time, or even the second. But that's the thing about being the forgotten one in the family. You stop expecting anything, and yet it still stings like hell when they prove, once again, that you don't matter. Not really. Not enough. They've forgotten my birthday every year since I turned 11. That was the last time I got a cake with candles, and my name spelled out in that awful pink icing from the grocery store bakery. I remember it like it was a crime scene. That year, my mom was still pretending to be into birthdays. She threw a rushed little dinner, invited my grandparents, made spaghetti from a boxed mix, and slapped a store-bought cake on the table like it was some grand gesture. My dad forgot to get me a gift, so he handed me a $20 bill and told me to get something nice, as if I was heading to a mall instead of trying to believe I meant something to him. The year after that, Lily got a full birthday weekend. 2 days of planned activities. Roller skating, a movie with friends, a sleepover, and even a birthday breakfast at that pancake place downtown that she loved. That same year, my birthday came and went without so much as a text. I reminded them the day after, and my mom sighed and said, "Well, you should have said something earlier, Emma. We've been busy." They were never too busy for Lily. I learned early not to expect anything. Still, it always left a pit in my stomach. You try telling yourself it doesn't matter, that you're too old for birthdays, that it's just another day, but when it's only happening to you, when your little sister gets the balloons and streamers and social media posts and iPhones just because, that's not something you can ignore. That's not something you get used to. That's just a slow drip of emotional poison you swallow every year and pretend doesn't rot you from the inside. By 17, I'd had enough of crying over invisible candles. I baked my own cake that year. I'd never done it before, but I found a recipe online for a chocolate one with raspberry filling. I didn't have the right tools, so I used a soup can to cut out the layers and stacked them like it was a masterpiece. I lit one candle, sang happy birthday to myself in the kitchen while my family was out at the movies for Lily's friend's birthday party. That wasn't even the sad part. The sad part was how proud I felt of that damn cake. I took a photo of it, too, posted it online with a caption that said, "Made this for someone special." Not a single family member liked the post. You'd think it would change when you're an adult. But I turned 32 this year. 32. And they still forgot. 2 weeks later, I watched them hand Lily a brand new iPhone. No holiday, no occasion. Just because she'd mentioned hers was starting to feel slow. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it hit me like a truck that I wasn't even mad anymore, I was numb. Like, completely detached. You know that moment in a bad dream where you realize you're dreaming and suddenly none of it can hurt you? That's what it felt like. Only this wasn't a dream. This was my family. I asked them about it later, casually, like I was just curious. "What's the iPhone for?" I said, sipping coffee I made myself while Mom scrolled on her tablet. She looked up and smiled. Oh, Lily's phone was acting up. We figured why not? No mention of my birthday. Not a flicker of realization. I stared at her, waiting for something to click, some tiny neuron in her brain to fire off a spark of guilt. Nothing. Not even a blink. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded and walked upstairs to my old room, which was now mostly storage because Lily had needed more space. My high school trophies were shoved in a box under the bed. My bedspread was gone, replaced with an old comforter from the guest room. It didn't feel like mine anymore, and maybe that was the point. Maybe it never really had been. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for maybe 10 minutes, thinking about how I'd spent my entire life waiting to be noticed, to be seen. And how fucking pathetic that was. You can't teach people to care. That's the hardest lesson. You can beg, explain, cry, argue, and guilt trip them all you want, but at the end of the day, they either see you or they don't. And if they haven't seen you after 32 birthdays, they never will. So I made a decision right then and there, quiet and clean and irreversible. No fireworks, no blowout argument, no slammed doors. Just a shift in the atmosphere. A final birthday without a single candle. They didn't even notice the change. Not that day. Not the next. But I had already started disappearing, and it was going to be beautiful. The next morning, after the phone incident had finally sunk deep into my bloodstream like a slow-acting toxin, I found my mother in the kitchen, humming to herself while making scrambled eggs for Lily, who was sprawled across the counter like some bored heiress. The smell of coffee lingered, bitter and burnt, but no one had thought to pour me a cup, and that absence felt louder than it should have. I stood there for a second too long, waiting to be acknowledged, but neither of them looked up. I cleared my throat, sharp, deliberate, and my mom glanced at me briefly, then back at the pan like I was nothing more than background noise. I was so used to being invisible I could have vanished right there, and no one would have blinked. "I need to talk to you," I said, not a question or a suggestion, but a clear, blunt statement that should have demanded her attention. She sighed, not out of concern but pure inconvenience, and turned the burner off before wiping her hands on a dish towel. "All right, Emma, what is it this time?" The way she said "this time" curled around my ribs like barbed wire. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the anger buried under the years of training I'd done in silence, repression, and strategic emotional detachment. "You forgot my birthday. Again. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 11 years, you've done absolutely nothing for me. Not a text, not a card, not even a stupid gas station cupcake." I paused, letting the weight of it settle between us. I spent the last 11 birthdays being invisible. That's nearly half my life. She stared at me like I'd just announced I was moving to the moon. Then she laughed. Not hard, not loud, just that dry, empty kind of laugh people give when they don't know what else to do and aren't interested in trying. "Emma," she said, like she was scolding a toddler, "you always make such a big deal out of things. That's just how families are. You're not 5 anymore. Grown-ups don't need birthday parties." That line hit me in a place I didn't even know was raw. "So Lily's not a grown-up?" I asked, arms crossed, voice ice cold. "Because she gets new phones and birthday dinners and matching family t-shirts for beach trips I'm not even invited to." My mother pursed her lips like I'd said something inappropriate, like I was the one who needed to lower my voice. "Don't start comparing yourself to Lily. That's just not healthy." She said it like a warning. Like I was the problem. Like I was the one poking holes in their perfect little illusion. I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked out, not because I was done, but because I didn't trust myself not to scream. I passed Lily on the way out, who had one AirPod in and was lazily scrolling on her phone. She smirked and muttered, always so dramatic, under her breath like it was some inside joke she shared with the universe. I doubled back. I couldn't let that go. "You know they forgot again, right?" I said, standing there like a ghost finally finding its voice. She raised an eyebrow without even looking up. "Forgot what?" she asked, but it was a performance, and we both knew it. "My birthday," I said flatly. "You've known for years. You just never said anything." She finally looked at me then. Not startled. Not ashamed. Just bored. "I mean, yeah, but like, I don't know. You were always kind of forgettable. You didn't really make a big deal about it. You didn't like the spotlight." She said it like she was explaining why a plant died because it didn't scream for water. "Mom and Dad always said you were more independent. That you didn't need all the stuff I did." And there it was. The part no one had said out loud, but I had always felt deep in my marrow. It wasn't that they forgot. It wasn't memory loss. It was convenience. It was choice. I made things easy by being quiet, by not asking for anything, by figuring things out on my own and not throwing tantrums or playing the victim. And they rewarded that by giving me absolutely nothing. Not even the basic crumbs of acknowledgement. I left that room with my heartbeat in my ears and something burning in the pit of my stomach that felt less like grief and more like gasoline. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't cry. I didn't make some big declaration. But I started planning in that quiet, surgical way you plan something that matters. I started calculating what it would take to erase myself from their lives, not dramatically, not with a bang, but clean and efficient, like pulling a plug from a wall. They wouldn't notice at first. They never do. People who only care about you when you're useful never realize you're gone until they need something. And when that day came, and I knew it would, they'd search for me in the places I used to be, in the messages I used to send, in the obligations I used to feel, and there'd be nothing left but silence. That night, I opened a blank document and started a checklist. Bank accounts, passwords, forwarding mail, old belongings, lease options in other states. I wasn't running away. I was just finally letting them live in the world they'd built, a world where I didn't exist. And I was going to give them exactly what they'd always treated me like. Nothing. There's something strange about the way silence becomes a decision before it ever becomes an absence. It doesn't come crashing down like a thunderstorm or rip through your life like a hurricane. It just sort of grows, like mold in a damp corner, slow and quiet and unnoticed until one day you look around and realize everything has already changed. That's how it was for me. I didn't sit down one night and decide, I'm leaving. It happened in layers, in steps so small they felt like nothing, until they became everything. I started by sorting through the things I owned. Not many, to be honest. Most of my childhood stuff had been boxed and shoved into the attic years ago to make space for Lily's second, creative space. She'd needed an art room, then a podcast room, and I became an afterthought with a nameplate. Still, I went through what was left in my old room, some clothes I hadn't worn in years, a few old notebooks, 3 pairs of shoes, none of which I particularly liked anymore. I packed what I wanted in silence, folding each shirt like it was a ritual, not because I cared if they wrinkled, but because the care felt symbolic. I was leaving on my own terms. Deleting my social media accounts came next, and that part was weirdly satisfying. I started with Instagram, scrolling back through all the photos of birthdays I wasn't invited to, family beach trips I hadn't known about until they were posted, and selfies with captions like "Family is everything," beneath smiling faces that had clearly never included me. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just hit delete, like I was erasing a ghost from the world. Facebook, gone. Twitter, gone. I left my email because I still needed a way to get job offers and reset passwords, but I changed the address in all the group chats so no one could find me easily. I didn't block anyone. I just made myself unfindable. The hardest part was closing my joint bank account. Yes, I still had one with them, an old setup from when I was in college, back when my dad insisted it would be easier to manage things that way. It had been years since he touched it, but I still felt that nervous clench in my stomach as I walked into the bank and asked to separate my funds and open a new account. The teller was polite, maybe too polite, like she could sense I was doing something personal and painful and didn't want to ask questions. I appreciated that. People don't realize how freeing it is to be treated like a stranger when you've spent your life being misunderstood by people who were supposed to know you best. I left one thing behind, a single framed photo from when I was maybe 9 years old. In it, I was sitting on the front porch with Lily on my lap, smiling like I still believed people stayed who said they would. I put a sticky note on the back, just one line written in black Sharpie, "You were there." But I wasn't. I left it on my now empty nightstand, half covered by the lamp that hadn't worked since last winter. That was all I wanted them to find. No goodbye note. No dramatic voicemail. Just that picture and the vacuum of my absence. By the time they realized I was gone, I had already signed a lease in a small town about 3 states over. It wasn't glamorous, no big city skyline, no ocean view, but it was quiet and cheap and mine. My new apartment had a creaky floor, the windows didn't seal properly, and there was a weird smell in the hallway that I couldn't quite place, but it was mine in a way nothing else had been. I bought a second-hand couch, a coffee maker, and a bookshelf I put together with one of those crappy Allen wrenches, and for the first time in my life, no one barged in asking where the scissors were or blaming me for a towel left on the floor. The peace was jarring, but good. Almost too good. Like my nervous system didn't quite know what to do with the quiet. A week passed before I heard anything from them. I didn't expect panic. I didn't even expect sadness. But I'll admit I was curious what they'd say, how they'd frame my absence. I'd changed my phone number, so the first thing that found me was an email from my dad, sent at 2:38 in the morning, which meant either he couldn't sleep or he didn't want to deal with it in daylight. The subject line was blank. The message itself read, simply, "So when are you coming back? Your sister misses you." That was it. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We're sorry." Not, "Please call us." Just a flat, emotionless one-liner that reduced my disappearance to a minor inconvenience. A scheduling conflict. An empty seat at the dinner table they hadn't invited me to anyway. I read it 3 times. The first time with anger. The second time with disbelief. The third time with something that surprised me, relief. Because that sentence told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't even begun to understand what they'd done. They thought I was being difficult. They thought I'd cool off and come back like I always had, ready to shrink myself down to fit into the cracks of their selective memory. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have things to say. I had entire monologues burned into my brain, but because silence, finally, was a louder answer than any paragraph I could have written. They could sit in their confusion. They could tell whatever story they needed to make sense of it. I was done explaining my pain to people who called it drama. I was done waiting for apologies that would never come. And most of all, I was done pretending that love without effort still counted as love. Revenge isn't always loud or fiery or wrapped in some final shouting match across a dinner table while glasses shatter and family secrets explode into daylight. It's sometimes quiet, calculated, and steeped in a kind of humor so sharp it cuts without ever raising its voice. After that email from my father, the one that pretended my entire childhood hadn't been a pattern of neglect and emotional erasure, something inside me stopped trying to be graceful. I realized I didn't need to forgive or forget or even move on in some noble, detached way. I just needed to laugh at the absurdity of it all and let others laugh with me. It started with a blog. Not the kind with pastel themes or self-help quotes plastered across the header in cursive fonts. Mine was plain white background, black text, no frills. Just stories. Sharp, bitter, funny stories that had been rotting in the back of my mind like forgotten leftovers. I named it Forgotten Candles, a nod to the birthday that had been missed every year since I was old enough to understand what it meant to be left out on purpose. I didn't use names. I changed locations. But I didn't lie. Every story was real. Every punchline had been lived. The first post was simple, a memory about my 12th birthday, where my mom threw Lily a back-to-school bash the weekend before but somehow couldn't remember my actual birthday 2 days later. I wrote it with a biting edge and enough sarcasm to make people laugh through their teeth, ending the post with, "But hey, she let me lick the spoon when she made cupcakes for Lily's friends, so that counts as affection, right?" I didn't expect much. Maybe a few strangers would find it relatable. I thought it would die in a forgotten corner of the internet like so many other anonymous confessions. It didn't. By the end of the first week, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. People were sending in their own stories, forgotten birthdays, invisible graduations, being the easy kid who got nothing while the loud one got everything. I suddenly wasn't alone, and that realization made something inside me click into place. I wasn't broken. I wasn't crazy. I was just tired of pretending the emotional crumbs I'd been fed were enough to live on. I started posting weekly, each one sharper than the last. One was titled Gift Guide for the Forgotten Child and included ridiculous items like noise-canceling headphones for when your sister gets a car on your graduation day, DIY celebration kits because no one's throwing you a party, and pre-written thank you cards to send to yourself so you feel acknowledged. It was hilarious. It was cathartic. It was petty, yes, but I wore that word like armor. Then came the twist I hadn't planned. A local news aggregate site, one of those small-town digital platforms that thrives on internet gossip and feel-good stories, picked up the blog. They did a little write-up on the anonymous voice exposing suburban favoritism with humor and heartbreak, and suddenly the blog was everywhere. Shares exploded. Comments poured in. People started speculating in the comment sections about who the family was. Some guesses were wild and way off, but others started circling uncomfortably close to home. It wasn't long before the blog made its way back to the people it was about. I found out when Lily texted me at 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed, watching ceiling fan blades rotate like slow knives, when my phone lit up with her name. I hadn't heard from her since I left. The message just said, "WTF did you do?" Mom's crying and blaming me. I stared at the screen for a minute, then laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a full, ridiculous, belly-deep laugh that startled my cat and made me feel 10 pounds lighter. I didn't reply. What could I possibly say that would top that? Later, I heard through someone I used to work with who still kept tabs on hometown drama that my mom's book club had been reading the blog aloud over wine, slowly piecing together that the sad birthday girl wasn't some abstract internet character, but her actual, flesh-and-blood daughter. One of them asked, apparently, if it was satire. My mom didn't answer. She just went pale and quietly poured herself more wine. That's what I was told, anyway. For the first time in my life, they were finally forced to look at me, not the version of me they'd invented to make themselves feel better, but the one who had lived in their house, sat at their table, and slowly learned that being quiet didn't mean being loved. I had no interest in their apology. If it came, it would be to clear their conscience, not because they truly understood the weight of what they'd done. But I took satisfaction in knowing the mirror had finally cracked, and they couldn't unsee the reflection I'd handed them. Some people would say I went too far. That sharing family business online is tacky. That I should have handled it privately, through therapy, or a heart-to-heart, or whatever other tidy narrative makes people feel morally superior. But those people never sat alone with a grocery store cupcake, trying to convince themselves they weren't being petty for wanting to be remembered. I didn't burn the bridge. I just finally stopped holding it up. And watching it crumble under the weight of their own neglect was, frankly, the most honest ending I could have given them. A year passed in a way that didn't feel like healing so much as decompression, like I'd been walking around with my jaw clenched for decades and only just realized how much that tension had hardened me into someone I didn't fully recognize. Life in the new city wasn't glamorous, and I didn't float into some kind of magical rebirth story where everything became golden and Instagrammable and full of soft lighting and poetic metaphors. It was more honest than that. There were hard mornings, a handful of lonely nights, and weeks where I'd barely scraped together enough for rent. But there was also a deep, quiet kind of peace that came from not waiting for someone to remember me. I found a roommate named Daria, a barista who painted strange portraits in her free time, and had the kind of unpredictable hair color that made her look like she belonged in a different decade every month. She didn't ask questions when I moved in with 2 duffel bags and 0 framed photos. She just helped me hang curtains, taught me the cheapest way to make cold brew at home, and remembered my name after the first introduction, which, frankly, already made her a better family member than anyone I shared blood with. We built something between us that wasn't exactly friendship in the let's talk about our feelings over wine sense, but more like 2 solitary planets deciding to orbit the same sun without crashing into each other. On my next birthday, I expected nothing. I genuinely mean that. I had told no one. I had taken the day off from work because I wanted it to feel like something even if no one else did. But around 8 in the evening, Daria walked in holding a single cupcake with a candle jammed in it at an angle that made the whole thing look like it was about to tip over. She said nothing, just shrugged and said, "I didn't know if you were into this kind of stuff. But whatever. Happy birthday, I guess." And it hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. Not the cupcake itself, or the candle, or even the fact that someone had remembered. It was the tone. Casual. Uncomplicated. No pity. No guilt trip. No sense that I owed her something for the gesture. She hadn't remembered to be congratulated. She hadn't done it to make herself look like a good person. She did it because she noticed. Because I mattered. In her quiet, strange, paint-splattered way, she'd seen me. That was the day the letter came. It wasn't an email or a text. It was an actual envelope, postmarked from the town I used to live in, written in my mother's cursive, which had always looked like it belonged to someone who sold jam at church bazaars. I held it for a long time before opening it, already knowing it wasn't going to be what I needed it to be. The paper smelled like perfume, the way she always oversprayed herself before heading to brunch or book club, like covering herself in something expensive could make up for what she lacked underneath. The letter didn't begin with, "I'm sorry." It didn't even start with my name. It opened with, "This has gone on long enough." 7 words in, and I knew exactly what the rest would be. It wasn't a confession or a reflection. It was a list of accusations, wrapped in performative concern, as if my silence had been a crime and her actions had been small parenting missteps, nothing more serious than forgetting to pack a lunch or missing a school recital. "You're being cruel," she wrote. "You're tearing this family apart. Your sister is devastated. Your father doesn't sleep." I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I sat down at my little thrift store desk and started typing a response, a long one, full of things I'd held back over the years, details they had ignored, moments they'd minimized, words I'd swallowed until they festered in my chest like bad fruit. I poured it all out, sentence after sentence, a decade's worth of silence, finally given shape and sound. It felt good. It felt earned. But before I hit send, before I printed it, before I even signed my name, I stopped. I stared at the screen for a long time and realized something that stunned me with its clarity. I didn't want an apology. I never had. I had wanted effort. I had wanted acknowledgement that required more than guilt or convenience. But you can't force people to care, and you shouldn't have to beg them to see you. When you stop begging for love, you start seeing who never intended to give it in the first place. And that truth, however painful, is the beginning of freedom. So I deleted the draft, closed the laptop, poured myself a drink, and watched the sun disappear behind the buildings outside my window. No one knocked on my door. No one barged in. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the ache of being forgotten. I felt the relief of being free. The next morning, on my 35th birthday, I blocked their numbers. Not because I hated them. Not because I wanted revenge or vindication or some power play. But because I didn't want to keep leaving a door open for people who had walked past it for years without knocking. I didn't want my future tied to people who still called my survival drama and my absence cruelty. I didn't want to keep pretending that silence was temporary when it had always been the most honest language between us. Maybe next year they'll finally remember. But they won't have a number to call. And I'll finally have peace.